Hey, welcome everyone to this evening. We have Alison Beatty back from Rosie the Riveter. Now this time to tell us more about the Lady Spies of World War II. I'll let Alison do more of an intro for herself. She's going to be a lot better at it than I am. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Okay, thank you, Justin. It's great to be back. You guys asked great questions last time. You're a wonderful audience. Thank you very much for having me again to talk about another amazing group of ladies from World War II. Let me try to share my screen now. Okay, do you see a blue, it says dangerous women? I hear a thumbs up or a yes.
Yes.
Great, and now I'm gonna put it into full screen mode. Okay, do you still see it?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. I'm just barely going to scratch the surface of all the cool things that these ladies did. I put this presentation together with my fiance, who is another history buff, and so I really hope you enjoy, and I hope this inspires you to start doing your own reading and research. And perhaps some of you in the audience know a little bit about this topic yourselves. So if you do, feel free to put something in the chat. Normally in person, I say just raise your hand and chime in at any time, but I can't see you. So feel free to just drop comments in the chat if you know something about one of the topics that we touch on. And then of course, we'll have some time for discussion afterwards. So we start with a quote from one of the oldest books on war of all time. An army without secret agents is exactly like a man without eyes or ears. And as you might know, if you're a Revolutionary War history buff, or even Civil War, spying was considered very shameful or like ungentlemanly at times throughout the years. But more and more armies came to realize that you could not win without it. And there was a little bit of female spying before World War II, so we're going to give you a brief overview of that. Women have been spies and secret agents for centuries. Some of the factors that give women a disadvantage in the workplace or that women have been struggling to overcome have also been great assets throughout time. They are often overlooked, for better or for worse. People ignore them and underestimate them. And they have multiple ways of getting information that oftentimes are not available to men. And they have proved themselves over time to be able to gather as much information, if not more. And obviously, women have every bit as much patriotism and support for the cause as men. And over the years, they have always found ways to contribute to the causes that they believe in. So during the French Revolution, we have Etta Lubina Johanna Palm Delder. She was a Dutch spy and feminist, and she was actually the founding member of the first female-only organization in France. And then during the 1700s, we also have Anna Smith Strong. She was a member of the Culper Spy Ring, which I believe had 6 people in it, women. So if you ever watched the show Turn on AMC, it's about that spying saga. And then during the Civil War, we also had lady spies on both sides. And of course, Harriet Tubman is well known, but the more I read about Harriet Tubman, the more I realize she's always even cooler than I learned about in school. She organized the Underground Railroad, yes, or well, not she didn't organize the entire thing, but she organized several sojourns through the Underground Railroad. But she also served as a Union scout and spy, gathering crucial intelligence because, of course, Black women were overlooked and underestimated all the time. So she was a very useful, very effective spy gathering information. And another fun fact, she was the only woman to lead male Union troops during the war. So in some ways, this makes her like one of the first commanding officers, female commanding officers for the United States military, which is just amazing. So seriously cool, definitely worth reading more about her. And then there were also lady spies for the Confederates. Rose O'Neal Greenhow was one of the most renowned Confederate spies and was actually instrumental at the beginning of the war with helping ensure Confederate victory at the First Battle of Bull Run. And then in World War I, we have Margaretha Geertruida, a MacLeod, Mata Hari, very famous, very infamous perhaps, and also Edith Louisa Cavell. She was a British nurse who helped over 200 Allied soldiers escape occupied Belgium. And she really was a nurse, but she was arrested and executed by the Germans, who alleged that she was a spy as well, because she was helping these soldiers to escape. And her death actually helped instigate a massive drive to get more British soldiers to sign up to fight in World War I. So in life and death, she was incredibly instrumental in shaping the course of the war. Now we come to World War II. After the fall of France in 1940, the Nazis were so strong and so powerful that the Allies truly feared that they would succeed in conquering all of Europe. And Britain was pretty much the only Allied country at that point that had intelligence anywhere in Europe after the Nazis took over, because they had gotten very invested in building intelligence networks after World War I. So MI5 formed the Double Cross Committee to try to persuade captured German spies to act as double agents. MI6 also cracked the Enigma code and established Ultra to try to collect, decipher, and disseminate intelligence to Allied leaders. But they still found, despite these efforts, that they needed much more information about what was happening on the ground. And in addition to just gathering information, Winston Churchill decided that it would be very valuable to start performing acts of resistance as well. And this happened independently of the British saying that they wanted to encourage it. But so there were a lot of small circuits that were being set up. Basically, one of the most famous was from the Museum of Man in France. And the museum is still there today. Pretty much everybody in the museum collectively decided to resist the Nazis, and they became, men and women, some of the very earliest spies during the war. But in July of 1940, the Special Operations Executive was formed in England to both collect information and then, quote unquote, set Europe ablaze through acts of sabotage and basically. So SOE began planning for collecting this information and also training for resistance and guerrilla warfare fighting, essentially. This was very new to have an entire branch of a government dedicated to this kind of operation. And the most crucial component of SOE was the department called F Section. And they were the ones who were going to be responsible for doing all of this in France, the heart of the resistance in World War II. So as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, at the beginning of the war, France was divided into the occupation zone and then also a quote-unquote free zone that was allegedly still French, but collaborating essentially with the Germans as well. And resistance movements started popping up all over the country in both the occupied zone and the free zone. And what they found that they needed more than sabotage even was information. They needed to know where the Nazis were staging their troops, what kind of fortifications they were building. Any information about the Axis powers would be useful at that time. And F Section did become the organization that was able to procure most of this information. So here are their two leaders. At the top of the pyramid for this organization was Colonel Maurice James Buckmaster. He was with F Section almost from the beginning. He was a tireless worker and a staunch defender of the troops, basically, that he sent out, male and female alike. And he was one of the early advocates for having women in these essentially life and death, extremely dangerous positions during the war. And Buckmaster could not have done what he did without his right-hand woman, Squadron Officer Vera May Atkins. She was basically just an incredible worker. She managed to pull many rabbits out of hats, magic tricks essentially. And she was the woman who became responsible primarily for the recruitment, training, and deployment of agents, particularly female agents, for F section. And what is very much less known about Vera was that she was not fully British. She was an immigrant from Romania, and she was also Jewish. And these things would have disqualified her from working for the British government during World War II. But she was so good at her job and very close to Buckmaster, who could not have done it without her, that this was pretty much swept under the rug for the duration of the war until she finally received the papers. So looking a little bit at how they trained these agents to go into the field, all SOE agents, male and female, got a lot of training. And there's a film, School for Danger, it sounds very James Bond, it was released to the public after the war that showed a little bit about the type of training that the SOE gave to their agents. First, they tested their ability to think on their feet, and then they would attend paramilitary schools, which would include physical training, how to kill people, how to use weapons, how to be out in the field, all this kind of stuff. And then they got parachute training, and then they moved on to B school, where they were taught about basically how to exist as somebody leading a second life in France and how to blend in, basically, including memorizing a cover story and alibi and like your second life and all that kind of stuff. And then in the final stage, they would have finishing school. They would receive their cover stories and get final evaluations, which included being like abducted in the middle of the night and like tortured by British agents trying to them not to break. So very extensive training. And there's actually a show on Netflix, like a reality TV show, where they give modern day people the SOE indoctrination or make them go through these courses. If you ever want to watch it, it's very interesting. I found myself being like, could I have passed that? Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't, I don't know. But it turned out that at B school, learning how to blend in was very important, because many of the agents that were being dropped in were just dead giveaways. They looked too British, too foreign, not French enough. Civilian dress and appearance differed substantially between England and the continent under Nazi rule. And one of the most important sources of information that ladies were able to provide back to England was what would pass for French once the new agents got over there. So here's one of the agents. Her code name was Christine Granville, wearing very simple, humble, plain civilian attire after helping demolish a bridge. You didn't want to come in with a nice warm coat or brand new shoes. Those would be dead giveaways. So unfortunately, many agents were arrested for things like that, but they got better as they got more agents into the field relaying information. So how they communicated was through wireless radio sets. This was one of the most important developments for World War II that enabled agents to report back to London. And women were particularly good wireless operators. Here's another still from that movie. This is SOE agent Jacqueline Noor practicing using a wireless set. And they were very heavy, so they had to be lugged around. And the Germans actually developed like a homing device where they could hone in on radio signals, find and kill these operators. So this was an extremely dangerous job. And over the course of the war, being able to communicate always was a bottleneck. And there were many, many female operatives who became wireless operators, and they did a very important job. And then here are some of the weapons that the agents, including the women, were trained in. There are very cool, specialized James Bond type weapons. So here's a silent pistol. The Sten submachine gun obviously could be folded or unfolded to provide extra power, but it was very compact. And there are all sorts of other gadgets, you know, like exploding cigarettes, and like you can imagine it, or if you've seen it in a James Bond movie, it probably eventually originated from World War II. And then they had all sorts of different kinds of weapons and guns. And if you're a gun enthusiast, this is a very cool like rabbit hole for you to go down. And this is one of my personal favorite aspects of female operatives in the field. They had to often fly in over airplane or come through submarines or boats. There was no easy, safe way to get into France to do their job. But here are some examples of the aircraft that would take them. So sometimes if they had a grass landing strip, they could actually land in the dead of night. Other times they had to actually parachute in. And so you can see some of the aircraft here that would have done that. And it didn't always work. Sometimes they had to cancel if the weather conditions were not correct. A lot of times the Nazis actually like infiltrated a ring and then would be waiting for the Allies when they dropped off the agents. So sometimes the life expectancy of an agent was as little as 3 months. And this was the first time that women were actively being sought after to go put themselves in dangerous situations where their odds of surviving were basically 1 in 3. So here we get to some of the ladies themselves, these incredible women who you could write a book about each of them. So women were never used in this kind of a situation before World War II, not on a standardized basis. But people at SOE, such as Vera and James Buckmaster, thought that women would actually be very good at these tasks for all of the previous mentioned reasons. They were calm, cool, and collected. They were overlooked. They would not draw attention to themselves. They were much more discreet and humble than many of the gallivanting men who thought this was all a lark. So they were given the cover of being in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. That was what they told their families, and then they were shipped off and had radio silence for the rest of the war. And here's Jacqueline Nairn again, undergoing weapons training. And the women did so well that eventually many of them found themselves leading their own resistance networks. This is truly an instance where women shone during the course of the war. And here's Buckmaster even saying that for certain jobs, women were quite superior to men. So here's Giliana Balmaceda. She was the first woman into France for SOE. She was from Chile, and she became an actress in Paris, and she married an English gentleman. And after France was captured by the Nazis, she and her husband returned to England and signed up to help the SOE. So she was one of the first women who passed the training.
Yes, sir.
And then she went back to France and went through the country, basically collecting information about where safe houses might be, what civilian life was like. Remember how people were getting it wrong? They were coming into France with like too nice of clothes and stuff like that. Balmaceda was collecting information that would help future agents blend in much better. And she was also able to ferret away a bunch of ration cards and identification papers to be replicated and forged so that the future agents could have their cover stories and their pass cards and stuff like that. And she was particularly fond of recruiting older married couples to the cause who might have a spare bedroom or something like that, because she found that they were trustworthy and that they were really dedicated to the cause of liberating France. So Giliana Balmaceda, the first female SOE agent into France. First female agents to parachute into France. This is Andrée Borrel. She was very young. I think she was in her early 20s when she signed up for this mission, which was incredible. She was an excellent courier. She was absolutely fearless. And unfortunately, she did get captured and was eventually killed. So one of the first female agents to be killed for the cause. And then Lise de Pézac, she was Mauritian. She was from Mauritius, which was a huge source of double agents for Britain because it was a British colony, but they spoke French there. So people from Mauritius were able to fluently pass as French people. There was no accent. And Lise was on the other end of the age spectrum. She was 37 when she went into France for SOE. She started out as a courier, which was another extremely dangerous job because the wireless operators would stay in one place, but couriers would have to pass through all of the security checkpoints and give off the air of innocence and someone just going about their daily business. And so she started out as one of these couriers. And there was a great passage I read once about how she had a bicycle, and bicycles were basically the most valuable possession you could have in France at that time because it gave you mobility, and there were just no bicycles to be found anywhere. She eventually led her own artist network and then managed to escape out of England after one of her networks was compromised, which was very difficult to do. And then she went back. She actually returned just before D-Day and helped arm a bunch of French resistance fighters. And then she herself helped those resistance fighters after D-Day move in and heckle the Nazis and help the Allied forces take over after the invasion. Noor-un-Nissa Inayat Khan, one of the best radio operators there ever was. You may have heard of her because she's quite famous. She was also the daughter of an Indian member of royalty, and she was Muslim. She was one of the first most famous Muslims of all time, female agents in particular. And she was like, when she was tested, her wireless operating skills put her at the very top of the class. She was pretty much unparalleled. Unfortunately, she was quite young and perhaps not as experienced in like the arts of survival, but she was extremely dedicated. Despite great risks, she stayed and tried to help other networks because there were so few radio operators, and that was the most important thing of all, was to be able to pass intelligence to England. She was betrayed and captured, and she was eventually executed as well. But to this day, she remains one of the most famous female World War II agents of all time, and is somebody to be very proud of. And now we come to one of the most incredible United States operatives, the American Artemis. So the predecessor to the CIA was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. And you may know one of the most famous OSS agents of all time was Julia Child, the famous chef. She was stationed in the Orient. She was in the Himalayas, like in India. And nobody really knows what she did, but she was very good at it. Anyway, America put together this Office of Strategic Services to try to help set Europe ablaze and do whatever else might be necessary to collect information and encourage sabotage on the ground. They did not always get along with their British counterparts. Remember, the Brits had been doing this intelligence collecting for a lot longer, and they had a way to go about it that they liked. And the OSS was like, well, we'll just come in and do it our way. So sometimes there was friction there. But OSS agents did soon move in and did quite a good job, most of the time working with SOE and supporting resistance groups on the ground in many countries, not just France. And so this is Virginia Hall, one of the best OSS agents of all time. She was the daughter, she was an heiress, basically. She came from a very, very wealthy family. And OSS preferred people like with this type of background, this sort of gentlemanly bourgeois background that would be comfortable in any situation and was more of a thinker than a doer. They preferred people who would think about plans rather than criminals who are good at breaking the law, because they thought that those were the type of people who'd be able to find their way out of any situation. And that's the type of person that eventually inspired the James Bond type character, sort of this gentleman, gentlewoman who could get out of any situation. She was very unique because she lost her leg in a hunting accident, and it was kind of her own fault. It was a really rough situation, and she was very depressed for a long time. Not only that, but also because she worked in the State Department, and she was basically funneled into a dead-end position. She applied over and over again for positions with more authority, but was basically getting liaison or secretary type jobs. But she never gave up. She's incredibly inspiring. And so when the war rolled around, since she was fluent in French, she volunteered to be a freaking ambulance driver with one leg. How cool is that? So she's one of the only Americans over there. She's a woman. She's disabled. and she's driving ambulances in the middle of like war-torn Paris. And when SOE found out that she was over there doing all of this, they said, wow, you can stay there because the United States is not at war with Germany right now. Why don't we set you up with a cover story? And so she became a journalist reporting home about conditions in the war. And of course, she was using that cover story to collect and disseminate as much information as possible about what the Nazis were doing, and also to set up a spy network and like a safety network for incoming agents. So she started with the SOE, and then as the OSS became formed, because she was American, she became a part of the OSS as well. She established the Heckler Network based in Lyon after her cover was kind of blown or given up after the United States entered the war. Then she had to basically go underground, and she moved down south because that was a huge hotbed of resistance, especially at the beginning. She established contacts with French resistance groups and became known as Marie of Lyon. And one of the best anecdotes I know of about Virginia Hall is that she simultaneously had a monastery and like with a bunch of nuns as a safe house, and also a brothel, and everybody was working for the cause. She was just that good at convincing people to get on the train for the cause of justice. And so for a long time, she was one of the only SOE agents in France. She did an excellent job maintaining the integrity of her network, and had many adventures, including coordinating one of the most daring escape attempts of the war. Eventually, her network was compromised, and she had to flee to Spain to escape France with her life. And she did, in fact, cross the Pyrenees with her wooden leg, and it caused her extreme pain, but she did it anyway. So some of the stuff that these lady agents accomplished just defies belief. They were truly inspirations to all of us. She always managed to avoid capture from the Germans, and they called her, the Germans called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. And for a while, they thought she was perhaps Canadian because they did not think an American would be so capable of all of the havoc that she managed to wreak. So she did transfer to the OSS after the SOE, and she learned how to be a wireless operator because that job was in such high demand that she said, you know what, I'm going to learn how to do it too. This is one of the most famous paintings of Virginia. She's hiding out in a barn using a wireless radio set. She went all the way for the cause. She often disguised herself as an old lady because they're very inconspicuous, and she actually filed down her teeth to change her visage. And I mean, it's just like such dedication. These people truly kind of put me to shame on days where I feel like being lazy. Like just everything they did was quite amazing. And then after D-Day, she returned to southern France, and she actually helped organize a Maquis like resistance unit to help fight against the Germans. And it took a while for her to get approval to do this. But by the end of the war, she was very much beloved as an actual like guerrilla military leader. Her group became known as the Diane's Irregulars, and they were very successful. And then while leading the Maquis, she met and eventually married her husband, Paul Goliot, and she made it all the way through the war, and she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross by the leader of the OSS, Wild Bill Donovan, and several other awards for everything that she managed to do. Now, the reason that the biography of her life is called A Woman of No Importance was because that eventually she was once again shunted into a corner in the newly formed CIA, and perhaps never got the full credit that she truly deserved. But she was always loyal to the organization and always said only the best things about them, pretty much. And then when she died, it reinvigorated interest in her life and her accomplishments. And today, she's one of the most proudly celebrated alumni of the CIA. So that kind of brings us to a discussion of the legacy of these female spies of World War II. Of the 39 women who were sent into occupied Europe during World War II, only 26 would manage to survive the war. It was definitely a high casualty rate, 1 in 3, or well, 2 in 3 chance of survival, 1 in 3 chance of death. Vera Atkins, who we met earlier, made it her mission to discover the fates of the female agents who were lost, which was made extremely difficult by the Nazi policy of Nacht und Nebel, night and fog, which was basically to eliminate and expunge all records of resistance fighters so that no one would ever know what happened to them, which in many ways is worse than having an official death record of some sort. Most of the remaining 26 female agents found a way to make it back into society. Many of them were living with trauma from the war, and the SOE itself regularly sent medication overseas to help both wake agents up and to help them go to sleep. It was extraordinarily nerve-wracking to live through what they lived through, and that trauma carried over into civilian life as well. But eventually, these women started to publish their stories so that we could learn more about them. And even now, more and more things are being declassified. So I'm really looking forward to getting to learn more and more about these agents over time. And many across Europe and the world are honoring them today, and that's a wonderful thing. Like I said, the Museum of Man in France honors the circuit that was started there. There's a new TV show about that actually on PBS, which is pretty cool. There's another lady in France, her name was Marie-Madeleine Fourcade, and she actually ran an entire group as well. And just like Vera Atkins, she made it her mission to track down every single male and female operative from her network who was killed and keep their memory alive as well. But the accomplishments of the female agents in World War II made it so that no one could ever again question the efficiency of women at spycraft. So even though agencies were originally reluctant to send women into the field, the precedent had been set. And now women are in all areas of intelligence and analysis. And Eloise Page became the first female station chief in Athens in 1978 and followed in Virginia Hall's footsteps to be a trailblazer. And then Gina Haspel was sworn in as the CIA's first female director in 2018. So women are truly now starting to be recognized for their ability to contribute to this field. And it's high time, I think. And I think Virginia and these other female agents will be quite proud. And Willow Run has a contribution to this legacy as well. As you know, if you were at the Rosie the Riveter presentation, Willow Run produced over 7,000 B-24 Liberator bombers. And we are famous for being able to have rolled one off the line every 24 hours, or sorry, every hour. Whew, what am I saying? And many of these Ford-built B-24s ended up in the 801st and 492nd Bomb Groups, who were charged with OSS and SOE aerial operations. They were painted black and known as the carpetbaggers, and their job was to send SOE agents and materials and supplies into enemy territory at night. It was very dangerous, and it was a crucial part of the success of SOE and Churchill's plan to set Europe ablaze. So we here on the home front are proud of the ladies who worked in the factories. We're proud of the ladies who were brave enough to take their lives into their hands and go overseas to be female spies. We are proud of the aircraft that we built here that helped in that operation as well. So if you come to the museum, if you come to Willow Run, you can see the factory that helped play a small part in this war, or in this part of the war, enabling female operatives to succeed at showing that women could be incredible spies and help turn the tide of the war. So with that, I would encourage you, as always, you can visit our website to learn more about these and other heroes of World War II and help keep our aircraft flying. And I hope to see you out at the museum sometime. So thank you very much. And that concludes my presentation. So I'll try to figure out how to stop sharing now. And those are my citations. Oh, and I have one more thing. I really can't figure out how to stop sharing. How about this X? I have a couple of books for you. Oh man. Oh, here we go. Stop sharing. If you, like I, love to read, here are a couple of books. This one's called A Cool and Lonely Courage. And this gal on the right is Jacqueline Nairn. She was in 2 of the pictures that I showed you of that training video. And this is her sister, Beatty. And they were both female operatives, perhaps the only sister duo who served in SOE. So that's a good one. And then here's the book about Virginia Hall, A Woman of No Importance. It reads like a thriller because all of the stuff she did was just insane. It's really good. And then this one, Madame Fourcade's Secret War. This one is all about the French lady, Marie Madeleine, who ended up running the largest and most important intelligence network within France. She collaborated with MI6, not so much with SOE, and their escapades are similarly daring and inspiring, and you won't even believe it. So if you like to read, those are 3 book recommendations I have. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Good job.
Thank you. I like that thumbs up.
Well done. Very informative. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hopefully this is a jumping off point. Definitely encourage you to go out there and watch some shows or do some reading, but these women were pretty inspirational. It's very cool.
Very inspirational. Thank you.
What is the Netflix show you were referring to?
Oh, it's I think it's called Resistance, and it's on PBS. So what I'll do is I'll send Peter a list of all of my recommended media, and you can peruse from. I think you can actually watch also School of Danger. I took the stills from the SOE training movie. I think it's on YouTube, so I'll find that and pass that along as well.
That's fun. Okay, thank you.
Have you ever watched the movie Defiance?
Oh, yes. I love that movie.
That great?
Yes, it is.
Good.
I have a whole separate presentation on the Russian women who were the first and only female fighter pilots in World War II. They are also, like, everything that happened over in Russia is just, like, next level.
Right.
Brave, crazy, yeah.
Right, that'd be great.
There is also a movie that we rented, we checked out at the library, and it was about the Indian spy in France. Her name was Noor, I think.
Yeah.
There is a movie about her.
Oh,
and
wow. I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, and I don't know the name of it, but it was at the library and it was free to check out. It was very informative about the radio communicators.
Was it a documentary or was it like a script movie?
It might have been a documentary.
It might have been a documentary.
That's probably better, since these movies tend to be sensationalized. So a documentary sounds awesome. I'd love to watch that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Alison, I'll pass along whatever information you provide me to the rest of our advisory council and others. But I just got a question in terms of your knowledge and your fiance's knowledge of all these women. Did anything come or occur to you about the personalities of these women, common traits that they had that would motivate them to take on this extremely dangerous work?
Wow, that's a great question. I think so. There's another book called D-Day Girls that talks a little bit about 3 different ladies who signed up, or kind of follows 3 different ones. And you can see similarities and differences in all of them. They were all exceptionally bright, but a lot of them signed up for different reasons. I think some of them literally had a thrill for adventure. Others perhaps were more dedicated to just like they were ambitious. They wanted to do more than just be a secretary or a nurse. And others kind of found their way into it like through, the gentry and being in elevated social circles. But I'm going to have to think more about if there were any single common traits. I love that question. I'm not sure.
Okay. No, I appreciate your response. It certainly covers part of it for sure.
I will also say that this book, A Cool and Lonely Courage, has a lot of Buckmaster's own observations himself, because he famously wrote a lot about like the psychology of all of the ladies who signed up. And sometimes he was spot on and sometimes he was completely wrong. So he'd be like, this one has no temperament for being in the field. And then that woman went on to do a great job. Or sometimes they thought they were going to be excellent and then they ended up failing. So if you want to read a little bit more about exactly what they thought would make a good candidate, this book has it.
Fantastic.
Any other questions for Alison?
Oh, Alison, obviously one other question. In your work over at the museum, et cetera, is there any other subject of this level, Rosie and Lady Spies, that you have prepared or developed a lecture series on?
I have just one other topic, which I hinted to a little bit earlier, which was the Russian lady pilots. There were 3 squadrons, night bombers, day bombers, and fighter pilots. And I think many of you have heard of the WASPs. Oh, I guess I have that presentation too. So I have a presentation on the American female pilots of World War II, of which there were over 1,000. They did incredible things, and some of them are still alive, which is really cool. But they only served here at home, mostly towing targets and like moving aircraft from place to place so that men could be freed up to go fight. But the women in Russia were actually fighting against the Nazis. They are the only women who served in an aerial combat role in World War II. And I think I alluded to, since like aerial combat is changing and we are not likely to see any dogfights anymore, for better or for worse, these women will remain like the highest aces of all time for the number of Nazis that they shot down. But even the fighters themselves are not even as famous as the ladies who dropped bombs in the night. They were known as the night witches because they were flying in these like little old airplanes made out of sticks and linen, and they would cut their engines as they flew over the Nazi trenches so they couldn't be heard, and they would drop bombs out of nowhere. And the Nazis were so scared that they called them night witches. So I would say that female aviatrices would be my other subject area. And if you guys are ever interested in that, you know where to find me.
Great.